I think that there is starting to be a perception that the broadband access issue is over, that we've solved it, that there's broadband everywhere, but really it's still a great concern in our rural communities.
20 years ago, when the broadband was rolling out and we were making those infrastructure investments, we knew it would be important, but I don't think anyone knew to the extent of the importance that broadband would have.
Well, if you have an 8-lane freeway to your home because you've got high-speed internet and you have the right technology on both ends of that 8-lane freeway, there's not much you can't do.
Welcome to the NCWLIFE Magazine. I'm producer Caitlin Hedersheet. On this episode, we're taking a look at digital equity and the digital divide in North Central Washington. Before we take a local look, let's talk about what the digital divide is. 30 years after the debut of the World Wide Web, we find ourselves in the midst of the information age, where billions use the internet as a primary tool in daily life. From homework and school for students to paying bills and keeping up on the news, it's nearly impossible to go about daily life without an internet connection. Many services require an online account to pay a health or electric bill. Even applications for jobs are most commonly found online. The Pew Research Center began collecting data on Americans' internet usage in early 2000, with nearly half of adults already online. Today, 9 in 10 American adults use the internet. While high-speed broadband service increased rapidly between 2000 and 2010, researchers say the growth has been more sporadic in recent years. Even though rural areas are more connected today than in the past, research shows substantial segments of rural America lacks the infrastructure needed for high-speed internet, and what access does exist tends to be slower than in non-rural areas. So what does internet access in the technology industry look like in North Central Washington? Jenny Rojanasatian, Executive Director of GWADA, the North Central Washington Technology Alliance, who connects and supports tech companies and entrepreneurs in the area, says this region has expanded dramatically in the tech industry over the last 10 years.
About 10 years ago, we've really started to see more technology companies from software-based, web-based, e-commerce come over from the west side of the mountains into the community, so really bringing a different dynamic of technology here. But our region's always been rich with technology, and that's been part of our role as the Technology Alliance to support, incubate, and showcase that. Because when technology is living inside of agriculture, out in our large distribution centers, our warehouses, our kids, for example, aren't seeing the high number of tech jobs there are, or if it's inside of a healthcare industry, again, they're not seeing it. So we've always had great tech and great innovation here, and now that we have the development of some of the smaller software companies and e-commerce, we see that a little bit more on the day-to-day and in the downtown.
This developing tech hub creates an interesting dynamic as local companies work to match the infrastructure to industries now thriving here. President of Local Telecommunications, Dimitri Mandelis, says from the start of his company in 1982, broadband has evolved immensely as they now work with fiber provided by county utility districts.
The PED essentially builds the freeway, but they don't provide any services on it. But they build that road. And then we provide, and others, provide the trucks and services and everything else that's going to go on that road back and forth. And so it's a good combination of technology. They're good at building roads, and we're good at putting the trucks on the roads. Yeah. Before the fiber build-outs, we delivered internet over DSL, which is copper loops from kind of like from the phone company to the person's home. It didn't go very fast. Had to be pretty close to the central office of the phone company. So normally that'd be within 3 or 4 miles of where our main building was, and we couldn't go out very far. And it didn't go very fast. 3 megs was really cooking, and then it went to 6, and then whooping 12. And with the fiber build-outs, everything changed. And fiber build-out in Chelan, Douglas, and Grant to the home started off with about 10 megs, and now the slowest connection we offer is 100. And they go to very rural areas in the county, areas where there was almost nothing, or nothing at all. So it's grown tremendously. So we started off with dial-up, and now we're at our slowest speeds are 100 meg if you're on fiber.
The digital divide is a topic hitting newsstands nationwide and quickly becoming line items on political figures' agendas. Who has broadband access? How does a lack of access impact a community? How do we make sure everyone has the skills to use technology? How do we expand access to rural areas? The digital divide, simply put, comes down to two main issues: a lack of skill and technology with individuals and families, and a lack of access. These two setbacks combined creates a risk of failing to work and interact successfully in this digital age. Nationwide, there are more than 20 million Americans who lack access to high-speed broadband. What about Washington State? In a study done by Microsoft, Chelan County fares well in comparison with the rest of the state, with over 80% broadband usage based on data from September of 2018. In areas further east like Douglas and Grant counties, broadband usage hovers around 40%. It's a complex issue. As the internet becomes less of a luxury and more ingrained into day-to-day tasks, communication companies like Localtel are tasked with how to expand service, while local organizations and school districts work to find the best ways to keep up with how to educate communities about technology.
I think in order to really make an impact in digital equity, it takes partnerships at every single level. So whether it's private sector, whether it's government, education, or even small business, we all have to be a part of the solution. I think organizations like the North Central Regional Library, which have locations in over 30 cities of North Central Washington, they're really trying to be proactive and providing Wi-Fi checkouts and more technology services at the branch, and looking at how they can get out in the community to do more education and resources. So that's just one organization that's really leading the way. It's going to take all of us to try to do more within the resources we have in order to impact everyone. I think the digital divide really impacts students. And the reason for that is accessibility to internet and great broadband really depends on where you live and then your economic status. So we're really lucky that our PUDs and our telecom companies like Localtel spent a major investment outlaying fiber, but there's still some affordability issues for some of our residents, and we know that some of our low-income families are not able to tap in and get internet, which means when their kids go home, the learning in terms of accessing that information online stops. And schools are rapidly changing in terms of technology, so whereas 10 years ago, perhaps a student could go to the library to fill in some of those gaps, they're really needing to rely on the internet every single day. So I think we've got rich access in a lot of our areas, but there's still some gaps in terms of affordability for our students. And then of course we have students that are remote that aren't in coverage areas. So if we want to prepare our students to be successful, they need to have the same access and tools as those who have resources.
I caught up with Camille Jones, who works at an elementary school in Quincy, at a roundtable in Wenatchee hosted by Senator Patty Murray to discuss digital equity and what this looks like locally. Jones says she sees what is called the homework gap, not only in the lives of her students, but with fellow teachers.
I came today to talk about digital equity and how teachers have such a potential to be a great resource to close gaps in digital equity for our students, and the concern that I have in the disparities amongst teachers' own skills in the digital world. And if we want to be a better resource to our students to learn, we need some support to also learn the skills ourselves. Quincy is unique because there's a lot of resources and companies coming in with tech and with the data centers that we have and all the construction and building going on there. It's growing. So we have a lot of unique resources that other rural communities don't have. But even in Quincy, I still have issues connecting and watching videos I need for my professional development from my home, and even in our school district's Wi-Fi access is not strong enough at times. And so it's kind of like a triple issue. There's the skills we need, there's the devices that we need, and there's also the access, the broadband that we need. And each of those we need to continue pushing forward because it's a continued progress.
When we come back, more on the digital divide and what solutions are aiming to bridge the gap. Welcome back to the NCWLIFE Magazine. On this episode, we've been taking a deep dive into the digital divide and digital equity. Access to broadband in Chelan County is of the best in the state, but companies like Localtel are working to continue to expand access to higher speeds to more rural areas. Mandela says the government is taking the same approach for universal access as they did with phone service.
To have a phone next to the central office and you're a block away only costs pretty cheap. But if you lived up at the end of the Indian Valley or very far away, that might be $50,000 to get a phone line all the way up there. And so what the government did, and still does, is create a thing called universal service. So everybody pays about the same amount of money, regardless of where you live. And so if you live next to the CO, central office of the telephone company, you might only spend $30 a month. And if you live up at the end of the canyon, you still only spend $30 a month because it's being subsidized by other people. And that's kind of been at play with phone service for a very long time, and now it's coming to the internet, where everybody should have, they think, internet at about the same speed, at about the same price, regardless of where you live. And that's kind of what they're working on right now. When you're very far away and there's nobody else that lives around you, or very few people live around you, there's not much of incentive to go and build and spend, could be $100,000 or more to get out to your home, and it'll never be recoverable. Plus, they probably won't ever see that many people there. So, but then how do you get people out there?
In an effort to help local companies bring services into rural areas with little access, the federal government made funding programs available to help cover the costs of expanding infrastructure, something LocalTel is now participating in.
Well, there wasn't the ones I'm involved with, there wasn't a Connect America fund that had billions in it. That mostly went to the big carriers, the Verizons, AT&Ts, Frontiers, that kind of thing. And then they had a Connect America Fund too, which is a bit more rural, even more rural than the first Connect America Fund. And that's one we got involved with. And there's one coming up after that that's going to be like Connect America Fund Free. I think it's a different name for it, but it's for even more rural, which is hard for me to concept, because the rural stuff they want us to go to, it's like you go 10 miles and there's four homes. And when you look from Google Maps, you're just like, you're sure there's even 4 homes here? We're having a hard time finding them. But they're coming out with another one. And I think politically it's a good story for the politicians to say we're going to connect all of these rural areas. And the PD, all the PDs, Chelan, Douglas, and Grant, are all building into some more rural areas all the time. Chelan is doing some up in the Leavenworth area, I think, and Grant's doing it in their areas. I'm not quite sure where Douglas is doing it, but I think they're all doing it. And so these are funds that are been set aside from the PUD payers to help expand it in those counties. In Adams and Lincoln County, those are the tougher counties. There's no fiber, or there's no big dams to help pay for the fiber. And so they're struggling with how to get internet out to those rural areas.
While the matter of whether or not high-speed internet is a right for Americans is tricky for Mandelis, he said he supports expansion and supporting rural areas for future growth.
For me, rights means, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So to me, those are the only rights that we have. But, if you're choosing to live out in the middle of nowhere, do you bear some of the blame of not getting high-speed internet, and are we obligated to build you stuff out there? And I think we're not obligated. But I think in general, I think it's a good plan to build this thing, because if you do build high speed out to an area that didn't have it, people will tend to move there, and that area will tend to grow because now they get all the connectivity that they want. So I think it's a good commercial thing to do. It just takes time to recover the cost of it.
This digital age is constantly evolving, and Mandelis says rural areas will tend to lag behind more urban areas when it comes to keeping up with new high-speed internet technology.
The rural areas will always be, I think, slower to get the higher speed stuff. There'll be an investment made to get them to a certain speed. Let's say it's 25 meg. And then the technology will change, and that 25 meg can then go to 100 meg. But it'll probably be lagging to the, being downtown right next to the internet companies and stuff, But I think that's kind of true. It's like you build the freeways closer to home, and then you start to put that money as it goes out in the valley into bigger roads going out to different homes. And so I do think it's just going to get better and better. I think all the people who are in charge, the politicians who are trying to do this, I think they're that's what they're trying to get done. And I think it's a good marketing thing for them, and I think it's a good for business and for those areas. So if they can get out there with a high speed, then I think you'll see people build there, because you'll have the connectivity you want. You'll have those freeways that you need.
That's a look at what the scope of the digital divide looks like as far as access to high-speed internet in our area. So what are locals doing to address the gaps in skill when it comes to using this technology? From libraries and schools to 4-H clubs, many organizations are finding ways to help those who need it. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the NCWLIFE Magazine. The digital divide is not just an issue about lack of internet access to rural areas or low-income households. Another factor into the divide is a lack of knowledge and skill because of inconsistent access to internet or technology like computers or laptops.
During our digital equity conversation, we had a student from Wenatchee Valley College share her story and how she has overcome some barriers in order to be successful in college. And she talks about how when you walk in the front door of college, if you have never had technology at home, continuous access to computers or internet, you're not as familiar with those tools, and it immediately sets you behind.
I am from a family of 8. I am a low-income, first-generation Latinx student. My dad is the only one that works. I have a grandfather that is battling lung cancer at the moment. I have a younger brother with autism and one brother that's going off to Central Washington University. So it is very difficult to afford and have reliable internet access and our own devices to use. And the reality is that in today's world, if we don't understand and truly know how to use these devices in a healthy manner safely and know how to foster these skills, we're disconnected from reality and disconnected from the opportunity to continue advancing and keeping up. Throughout our K through 12 journey, we have a gap. So we didn't have internet access, we didn't have computers, we didn't even know what a Chromebook was. But once we go to higher education, we're expected to know how to use all of these programs, which is very difficult because we see that other students that had more privilege and they went into STEM fields, they know how to use all these devices, while students kind of like me feel like they were inadequate and not smart enough to actually deserve the opportunity to learn how to use these devices.
Something tells me you're smart enough.
And so, when students are already having to overcome maybe some social or economic barriers, technology has also become a barrier when they're really trying to pursue education at a higher level.
Also at that Digital Equity Roundtable were community partners who shared their stories of how they are working to close this gap. Specifically, how does this divide impact the senior population in our community?
A couple years ago, National 4-H and Microsoft partnered to help the connectivity gap in rural areas by empowering our youth to help teach technology in our communities. I have a couple of the youth here today.
I see that,
Nancy
yeah.
and Nora.
Hi, you
and,
guys. So the young students are teaching
the adults. So we go to the senior center and we do what we call pop-up events where anyone can come in, and we have round tables where they can go to learn social media, they can go to learn, if they just want to learn how to access their health records,
Right.
or how to access the school, their children's school records, or how to send pictures.
I hear that so often.
Store the photos.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the simple little things that we're teaching right now. But we've found that there's such a huge gap as far as, first of all, how do you turn your phone on, to, I want to learn about Excel, or something, Microsoft Office or something like that. So that it's hard to, we've had a couple classes, consecutive classes, like 4 to 6 week classes where they come back and they learn something different each time. But they're all on such different levels, and we find that a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
So we found that the easiest thing is to just get enough students. We have about 7 students. Try to have 2 adults per student, and they ask any question they want to ask, and we just teach them about that. We found that we feel like we're working on the ground level, teaching them the importance of broadband and what they can get from technology, whereas a lot of people in this room are working from the other direction down. So when we can come together, I think it'll be amazing.
There's technology gaps for our youth, but there is some training, development, and exposure in our school systems. So for people my age and younger coming through, they've at least been exposed to the internet. They usually know how to do some basics, but for those populations that never had access to technology, our senior populations, and especially those in low income, they may not know how to utilize the internet in order to pay their bills or to get information about healthcare. And so it's really important for us to look at digital equity from the full community perspective. And we want to empower our youth to be successful, but we don't want to leave our seniors behind. So I absolutely think that it's not just segmented to one population. Digital equity impacts everyone. The transformation to an online world is only going to continue, and it affects everyone in our community.
The Digital Equity Roundtable was an opportunity for Senator Patty Murray to listen to local stories on the impacts of the digital divide and inclusion efforts. Senator Murray is heading up the Digital Equity Act of 2019, aiming to address these gaps by promoting a variety of inclusion projects at a state and local level through funding opportunities.
We have to face this as a nation. There are people who are getting this and people who are not. And we will all benefit, our society, people, our economy, bringing businesses to communities like this, and just the well-being of all of us if we bridge that digital divide, which is why I introduced this legislation, the Digital Equity Act, to work on the side of it that we have forgotten, which is how do we make sure communities like this have the resources they need through their libraries, through their schools, through the Y, through different programs. They create it themselves. And what my bill does is give grants to those communities to bring those people together and to provide those skills and tools.
One of the things I liked about the Digital Equity Act was that there was two pots of funding. One of those was for states to look at their infrastructure and their systems and to make plans around addressing accessibility. The other funding was for community organizations to apply for grants and try to support digital equity from a variety of lenses. I think education for teachers is especially important. So we often fail to think about the technology education our teachers have received and the support they receive in the classroom in terms of making a digital transformation. So it's great if we're going to put the tech in the classroom and provide the access to broadband, but if our teachers don't feel comfortable, empowered, and educated on teaching students, they're not going to roll that out in their classroom. So some community resources for things like training the teachers is really important, alongside addressing infrastructure and making sure this is going out to people's homes when they leave school.
Whether it's communication companies like Localtel working with public utility districts and the federal government to expand internet access, or the many local organizations and community partners working to close gaps in technology education for all ages, Rojan Asatian says North Central Washington is a great collaborative community.
The magic of living in rural Washington is that we care about our neighbors, and that typically speaking, people want to find partnerships and ways to solve problems and work together, because these are the people that we see at the grocery store, and these are our neighbors and our friends and family. So we don't want to see people left behind. I think when you're in a smaller community and you're close-knit, it only reinforces why you would want to work so hard to solve these problems. I think that being in a small community, we also have to balance our resources and be scrappy and resourceful. And so we have a history of people knowing that they can't just stay in their lane and just do one thing, that won't be enough. So we have to be a lot more collaborative and supportive and find ways to stretch each of our organizations to do more.
That wraps it up for this episode of the NCWLIFE Magazine. I'm producer Caitlin Hedersheet. If you're craving more local content, head over to ncwlife.com to check out the on-demand archive, where you can find more episodes of this show and others from NCWLIFE. Thanks for watching.